It's no secret to anyone that knows me, and if you don't know me, I'll do the favor of exposing myself now, that I was a very mediocre athlete in high school. As Junior Soprano once infamously and hilariously said to his nephew Tony, I never had the makings of a varsity athlete. I tried very hard, did all the right things, positioned myself in the best way possible, but it just didn't work out. It was never my thing, even though I loved to be a part of it while I was in it. But I learned many things during my time as a lackluster varsity athlete. I learned the importance of keeping yourself disciplined, how to effectively navigate conflict, how to work very hard without reward, and many other things. But the most important thing I learned, one that I believe everyone should know, is that you can work as absolutely hard as you possibly can at something and still lose. That's an incredibly useful thing to know, and something I wish everyone knew far earlier than most unfortunately do. However, perhaps the most relevant thing I learned had nothing to do with high school football, track, or weightlifting. Rather, the most relevant thing I learned, the thing that would soon begin to shape the world around me as I departed from my home and began to craft my adult life, was something that ran tangentially with my lackluster high school sports career and would soon later take the world by storm. One of the most celebrated days of any football season, particularly at a very good and well-run program like mine, is the first day of contact practices in the summer. That's when the season really kicks into gear, as most people who have played and love football understand. Football is different and better, by the way, than all other team sports because of the toll it takes on your body holistically. The pains, the aches, the ice baths, the saunas, everything. There's nothing that comes close. But the inaugural practice of celebrating this tradition at my high school, even in comparison with other good programs, is very much unique. For our first day of contact, we would move our practice to midnight under the lights and invite the entire town into our practice as kind of an open forum. It was our best attempt at a modern-day crucible, a gladiator ritual that exposed the players from the posers. It was awesome, to be frank, and something that was a celebrated event across our small Northeast Ohio town. The last midnight first contact practice that I participated in took place remarkably almost 10 years ago. That was fast, on August 6, 2015. However, I remember that date not because I did particularly well in the exhibition, because I didn't. In fact, I don't remember the date because of anything related to high school football, believe it or not. Instead, I remembered that date because I witnessed something far more seismic, something that, little did I know, would change the course of world history a couple of hours before I stepped on the football field. On that night of August 6, 2015, the first Republican presidential primary debate was held in my hometown of Cleveland, Ohio. I was set to vote for the first time next November and tuned in to get a glimpse of what I presume would be an overwhelmingly boring and uneventful night. My parents hardly talked politics in our home. It was, thankfully, very irrelevant to our overall family dynamic. We had a lot more important things to take care of, as most people know who know me and know my family. I knew enough about the lay of the land to get a look into what my first worldview was. My grandparents were Blue Dog Union Democrats who hated Republicans, most notably and reasonably, I might add, because my grandfather had been fired by President Reagan in the early 1980s due to the air traffic controller union strike. My parents had supported and voted for Bill Clinton in the 90s and had subtly supported John McCain and Mitt Romney in their runs against Barack Obama in 2008 and 12, even though they weren't fanatical fans of either person. Wonder there. The rest of my family ranged across the spectrum, mostly leaning right at this moment in 2015. My most political uncle, who also doubles as my godfather, recommended I read Rush Limbaugh at the age of 12, for example. I passed on his request. All of that said, I went into the debate with a totally open mind. I didn't like anyone in particular and didn't think anyone was going to stand out. I watched more out of obligation, thinking that I was somehow a better rising citizen because I simply watched a bunch of old people speak sternly to one another on public access television. And then Donald Trump happened. For the past month, Trump had been absolutely dominating the headlines after his now famous descent down his trademarked golden escalator. He had been ripping politicians up and down, brutally castigating them as dismal failures, people who should never be allowed to sully our public offices with their mediocrity anymore. He was a disruptor and quickly made the ire of nearly every person in institutional authority and power. Yet going into the debate, his approval rating was higher than every other politician on the stage, most of whom had held some form of successful career in political office before, not making light of Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. It wasn't that I was drawn to Trump, as were so many, by his policies. Being 17 at the time, I hardly knew what a political policy was, or what it does, for example. The main thing that attracted me to Trump was simple. He was different, in the simplest ways. He was brash and loud. He wasn't a waxed figure that looked like he spray painted his hair gray before making a public appearance, although you can make an effort to say he did gold instead. He talked like one of my mom's brothers, both of whom worked in construction and manufacturing. He was absolutely hilarious, something that took 16 people on that stage completely off guard. In that regard, Trump had stolen my attention, and that of the entire country. As they went through the debate and prepared for it, this was the storyline: Donald Trump running as some kind of a gag figure. Later, people would find out he was far from it. And I kept a tab on Trump throughout the entire campaign as he marched towards the presidency he would later claim the following November. My parents largely brushed him off, as mentioned, as unserious, gravitating more towards the quote-unquote serious candidates, such as Ben Carson, Ted Cruz, and Scott Walker. My grandparents recoiled at everything Trump said, as most seniors did and still do. They didn't like Trump because they didn't like what he represented: a threat to everything they knew. The post-World War II order of America, comprised of neoconservatism, neoliberalism, and statism that defined the 20th century and everything in the 21st century in America, up to the point of Donald Trump coming on the scene. But as I continued to watch Trump, as his jokes and off-the-wall behavior became enmeshed into his personality, I started to look deeper into the rising phenomenon of Trump's MAGA movement. What was the guy with the bleached blonde hair and orange skin actually saying? Why was this popular? Moreover, why was someone like Trump, a thrice-married New York City real estate mogul and reality television star, able to resonate with people such as my construction and manufacturing worker uncles in Rust Belt, Ohio? I thought that was an interesting question, but yet nobody asked. However, many of those answers were found, unsurprisingly, in small nuggets in that August 6th debate. Trump's most famous answer, where then Fox News moderator Megyn Kelly hammered him with, was his comments calling the View panelist Rosie O'Donnell a fat and slovenly dog. Thinking she would catch Trump as a misogynist, Trump instead did the unthinkable. He leaned into it. Of course he said those things about her. Rosie O'Donnell should be made fun of, because Rosie O'Donnell is an absurd and gross person, with an infuriating sense of self-importance for being nothing more than a celebrity. This used to be commonplace in America. It made total sense to me, and apparently to half the country. Trump continued to make total sense to me and half the country as he continued. As the beginnings of woke culture were beginning to show their faces across society, Trump addressed it before anyone else did. Quote, "I think the big problem this country has is being politically correct, and I don't frankly have time for total political correctness. And to be honest with you, this country doesn't have time either." Boy, was he absolutely right on that, and took home extra brownie points because of the cowardice of the other candidates failing to say as such. Additionally, when taking a jab at New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, another failed politician most famous for his closure of a bridge and morbid obesity, more so than Rosie O'Donnell, Trump pointed out the national debt, something that every politician on stage, with the exception of Rand Paul, was absolutely appalled and petrified to do, and was in favor of, due to their hawkish nature of foreign conflicts and deficit spending after the '08 financial crisis that had gutted America's middle class. Quote, "By the way, this country right now owes $19 trillion, and they need someone like me to straighten out that mess," Trump said. As of this show, not even 10 years later, our debt has exploded to $36.5 trillion. Trump continued to poke the bear on the campaign trail, saying that no Republican politician had dared to say for 25 years. The Iraq War, for example, he stated, was a horror show and the worst foreign policy decision in the history of America. The massive influx of foreign nationals into our country, particularly into our southern border, was not, quote, compassionate, but rather something that had gouged wages of American working-class citizens. He questioned the United States funding of NATO, an institution that has no purpose since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. All of these things absolutely infuriated stalwarts of conservative politics like The Atlantic and Weekly Standard magazines, the Cato Institute, and mainline Republican swamp creatures like Lindsey Graham, Mitch McConnell, and Paul Ryan. They hated Trump and made no bones about showing it. But there was a deeper level to their hatred, one that hit them on a deeply personal level. The real reason they hated Donald Trump, and one that none of them would ever dare to admit, was because he was something they could never be, and never were. Cool. For the entirety of their existence, Republicans had been your grandfather's preferred politics. They were the ones who hung out with the Chamber of Commerce and in smoke-filled rooms, drinking aged bourbon and smoking imported cigars. They were the untouchables, the elites, the ones who everyone loved to hate, but yet somehow always hung around. There were legitimate reasons for their hatred, legitimate reasons as to why Barack Obama had trounced their last two political candidates, for example. But Republicans didn't do a single thing about it. They continued to be unaware and unimpressive losers, reclining into their complacency and enriching their donors along the way. That was enough. That was what they wanted. But Donald Trump was different than that. His wife was the literal supermodel, infuriating Republican politicians who did the quote-unquote proper thing by marrying their high school sweetheart. They mowed their bones by licking the boots of the right people at the right moment. Trump, by contrast, did exactly what he wanted all the time. While they hung out with the soulless corporate shills who gave their political careers life support, Trump hung out and golfed with Tom Brady and Mike Tyson. They resented Trump deeply for all of these things, much like the academic decathlete deeply resented their star quarterback in high school. And as we all can remember, that runs very deep indeed. It was this deeper resentment, disguised as political resentment, that fueled the blitzkrieg of Trump's reputation before, during, and after his presidency. They did everything they could to destroy him at every turn, in a testimony that needs no further revisitation. The slander, the lies, the BS, the nonsense, the gaslighting, all of it, nonstop for 5 years, over and over and over again. But the biggest victory that the anti-Trump movement, from both the left and the right, mind you, happened in the aftermath of January 6, 2021. Trump was so castigated, so vilified by every person who had an incentive for him to be so, that they knew they couldn't waste this opportunity. And they didn't. They deplatformed Trump off of social media, his most powerful tool that revolutionized political campaigning. They threw some of his most valuable allies, such as Steve Bannon, Peter Navarro, and Roger Stone, in prison. They raided his home at Mar-a-Lago, with our country's state police, the FBI, justifying it by claiming that Trump was hiding live nuclear codes next to his wife's panties. Following the raid, more lawfare was unleashed by district courts in Georgia, New York, and D.C. There was a real chance that Donald Trump could go to federal prison, never seeing the light of day again as a free man. Never before had Trump been lower, a rumored political comeback, now thought to be impossible. But yet Donald Trump is once again the President of the United States. In the greatest year-and-a-half sequence in American political history, the magic of the 2016 campaign came back. Trump decimated primary components without even touching the debate stage, ranging from conservative squishes like Ron DeSantis and Tim Scott to neoconservative clingers and grifters like Nikki Haley and former running mate Mike Pence. He pulverized Joe Biden and Kamala Harris via social media, mostly due to Elon Musk's acquisition of Twitter, now named X, which unleashed free speech from social media censorship and suppression. He leveraged new media, doing a remarkable 3-hour podcast with Joe Rogan, among others, that was viewed by an astonishing 1 million people per hour during its first live day on the internet. The result? An unprecedented landslide that served as a throbbing middle finger to the bi-coastal, bipartisan elite that has shipwrecked its citizens over and over again. There are many things to analyze about Donald Trump's resurgence. However, I believe many of the debates and discussions happening about it now, as important as they are incomplete. The phenomenon of Donald Trump is far more than getting rid of government waste, negotiating peace to foreign wars, and stealing our southern border, which the Biden administration demonically left open on purpose. Instead, the most remarkable thing about Donald Trump's resurgence is the same phenomenon that made him surgent in the first place. He's cool again. Donald Trump's popularity has never been higher. The current generation of America's young people is, by far, the most conservative on record, including with ethnic minorities and women, dating all the way back to the early 1900s when they started recording this data. NFL players and MMA fighters do the Trump dance, they win the Super Bowl and heavyweight titles. Big tech overlords nearly trampled each other to get a glimpse of his inauguration speech, with Mark Zuckerberg sporting an afro and chain, and Jeff Bezos' wife almost nothing at all. This is a strange phenomenon, perhaps the most strange of our time. The question we should be asking, and really the only question that should ever be asked of someone like Donald Trump, is the following. How did this happen exactly? Well, there are many reasons as to why Donald Trump is the most popular president and person, by the way, of our lifetime, which he is, undoubtedly. Instead of loathing that, as so many people do, their efforts would be better directed as to understanding it. We've talked about many things specifically to Trump that make him so, and are going to leave him at this pace the most transformative figure in American history since Martin Luther King Jr., and maybe, dare I say, even more so when it comes to a holistic perspective. However, as we've mentioned so far, the theme that resonates deepest pertaining to Trump is far more generalized and relatable. The primary thing people respect in another person is their ability to see them for who they are. When you were 5, for example, and someone didn't share a toy with you after you asked nicely, you rightly felt rejected. That person is selfish, you thought. They don't see that you want not just a toy, but maybe a friend too, someone to commune with, to develop a relationship with, to talk to. It's much more than just a toy. It's the lack of human connection that made you recoil so quickly and rightly. As we age, we like to think naively that we're somehow beyond this, but we're not. In fact, the worst things that humans have ever done, due to many things like phones and social media, is numb our instincts. This has been a terrifically terrible idea, with awful consequences. Instincts are a God-given thing. Trying to pick a fight with God in any form is not a recipe for success. On October 20th of last year, a little less than 2 weeks before America made him the 47th president, Donald Trump manned a cash register and fry station at a Pennsylvania McDonald's. It's no secret that Trump has a great love for the all-American chain. His trademarked order of a Big Mac, Filet-O-Fish, and vanilla shake have been well documented. But what was not well documented, and what was unavoidable at a campaign stunt of this magnitude, was displayed in an interaction between Trump and an Indian couple as they pulled into the drive-thru. As Trump readied the fast food handoff, the man driving the car was in disbelief, saying that there was no way a quote-unquote ordinary man like himself could be served grizzled beef by a former and potential future president. Upon this line, Trump said the most impactful phrase of his entire campaign, and I would argue across all 3 of them. 3 words that should, if people have any sense, be studied for decades to come in political science and theater. You're not ordinary. For far too long, American citizens have been treated as ordinary by people who don't respect them at all. Your union factory job in an auto plant just got outsourced to Zimbabwe. Learn to code, rube. Uncomfortable with pornographic and sexual content being displayed in your kindergartner's library? How dare you? Get over it, bigot. Upset that your tax dollars are getting pilfered away by USAID to fund a Middle Eastern version of Sesame Street? Shut up with your jingoistic rhetoric, you phobe. When looked at with a broad brush, it's dumbfounding at just how long Americans have put up with this, and just how vicious America's ruling class has been in cramming every bit of their nonsensical rhetoric down their throats. But what isn't dumbfounding to Americans, and conversely why it's so dumbfounding to our institutional power brokers, is why they love Donald Trump. But when they do realize it, it's so horrifying to them, so fatalistic to their century-long crusade, that to gaze upon it is to gaze upon death itself. Trump is loved by his voters because Trump loves them. The most frustrating part about being an American citizen is, by far, the amount of contempt, of hatred that our elites show towards us. They show no qualms in letting us know about it. When you want to see what's important to any person, follow their attention, their votes, and their wallets. Our ruling class, particularly in our politics, has failed on all 3 of these tests for a very, very long time. And now they're no longer able to get away with it. For example, Bill Clinton offloaded America's middle-class jobs to foreign nations, gutting their wages, sending their communities into poverty, and opening the floodgates to crime and drugs. George W. Bush fed the youngest generation of Americans into a wood chipper and blew out our budget by spending $8 trillion on pointless and stupid overseas conflict, which led to the 2008 financial crisis in part. Barack Obama lectured them about their inherent privilege, importing hatred into our political system by taking the lid off of identity politics and wokeness. Oh, and he bombed a lot of people too. That all stopped when Donald Trump entered the fray. Trump came with his own problems, as all people in these positions tend to do so. He was brash, loud, and offensive, a bull in a china shop, someone who had far more regard for himself than any institution he is entrusted, back then and now, with leading. But the one thing you cannot say about Donald Trump, as someone who has been in circles with his supporters for years now, is that he doesn't love the people who love him. The commonality with Trump, whether it's a political opponent, a journalist, or an everyday citizen, is that if they like him, he tends to like them back. When the majority of the country turned against him, as it did during his dark age period, Trump was combative, gloomy, and vengeful. When the majority of the country turns towards him, he was energetic, focused, and fun. The truly transformative thing about Donald Trump is, at the end of the day, nothing that he has done. Instead, it is a posture of what he plans to do and how he acts in his day-to-day life. Americans have not had a president that truly cares about them to this extent in 100 years. It's why our ruling class has always hated him, and why American citizens, both in the past and present, have always, in one way or another, loved him. In one of Trump's most memorable moments on the campaign trail, he ad-libbed a speech in Michigan by saying that he took a bullet for democracy. But that wasn't true. Trump took a bullet for his voters. His reason is the same for why he's back in the White House. It's simply what you do for the people that you love.